Hello and welcome to the Potential Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Jackson, and it's my mission to share the science of human behaviour in a practical, fun and inspiring way. With me today, coming to you from Sydney, we are in mutual lockdown between Sydney and Victoria today, is Kristy Smith. And Kristy is the owner of and founder of Virtual Elves, which is a virtual assistant organisation. She can tell you all about that, but I will declare my interest here because my two wonderful assistants who, distressingly for my children, are in fact real people. When I call them virtual assistants, I think they're imagining holograms or something. They are wonderful, real people. They're just not here in Australia with us, and they have both come to me via Virtual Elves and Kristy and her business. And we're going to chat today about virtual and remote working because that's topical right now. We're going to talk a little bit about having to deal with the challenges of lockdown and global pandemics and how you run a business under those circumstances when you're also a parent and you're juggling all the challenges of kids at home. And we're going to talk a little bit about resilience and what it takes emotionally and psychologically to get through all of those challenges. So welcome, Kristy. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely seeing your journey with using the virtual assistants that we've managed to pair you with. And so it's nice to actually be on a call with you and talking about that in a broader sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, look, it's been, Jay has been with me now it's been more than 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe even 4, I can't remember. And Sherry joined us in the midst of the pandemic, which we might talk a little bit about, and people's need perhaps for more assistance, or what was happening with businesses that use not just virtual assistants, remote staff, but all businesses and their challenges in 2020. But before we do all of that, can you tell us a little bit about Virtual Elves? How does it work? Where do you operate? How do you operate? And where did it all start?
Well, it's a long story. We don't have that much time, but the short part of the story is that I worked for many years in customer service roles, so managing hospitals, 5-star hotels, customer service in that, food and beverage outlets, that sort of thing. So lots of training, lots of staff hiring, and lots of, bringing people together to service customers, basically. And when I had 2 small children, hadn't yet started primary school, and I just felt that working in corporate as I was at the time, it was really straining on my ability to be flexible for my kids. And I knew that I didn't have kids so that I could, be off, not sort of catching those milestones. And so I decided before my daughter started school that I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to be at home. And so I started to think about what skills I had, and I jumped online and found an article talking about virtual assistants out of the UK. And I was really fascinated by that because, 11 or 12 years ago when I thought about doing this, there really wasn't an industry in Australia for virtual assistants. And most businesses didn't actually know what it meant or even the term virtual assistant. Even nowadays, I'm still coming across people that don't understand what that means. And so at that point, I decided that I'd give it a go. And with the support of my husband, I said, I'm dropping out of my 5-day-a-week job and I'm going to spend more time with the kids and try to build this business. And so for the first 3 years, I did that, and it was all very lovely. But it didn't really make me much money because it was just me, and I only had a certain number of hours available. And so I decided at that point, probably 2 years into the business, that I needed to think differently. And I was pretty resourceful, and I jumped online, and at that time it was called Odesk. It was an online freelancer platform, and I jumped on and I found a virtual assistant in the Philippines, and I sort of said, maybe she could help me do some small parts of the business that would help me scale and grow a little bit more beyond where I was. And so Cherry has been with me for 10 years now. She's still with me, and she manages our whole team out in the Philippines. And from there, it just grew, and we just kind of started building different elements of the business, graphic design, web development, those sorts of things that kind of allowed us to bring more clients on board and more resources into the fold. And we now have 32 virtual assistants out of the Philippines, and we're a home-based model. So all of our team work from home, which has been absolutely incredible during this pandemic because the Philippines got hit very hard. So very, very lucky that we were able to sustain our business and support our clients without any hiccups at all.
Mm. And so just making sure that I'm really clear and that our listeners are really clear. So when you started, you were the assistant. Is that the case? You were supporting.
Yeah.
So, who hires, I know who hires a virtual assistant and what they use them for, but
Yeah.
perhaps from your point of view, who hires a virtual assistant and how do they use them? How does it work?
Yeah, well, back then I was working for IP lawyers and I was doing a traditional executive assistant or personal assistant role. So, very much I was going into their office, helping them. I was doing some work from home, and it just made me realize there was a lot more that I could be doing from home that would alleviate the travel time, the idle time sitting in the office, those sorts of things. So the types of things I think that work really well for businesses hiring a virtual assistant are things like social media and digital marketing. So anything that you can do online to, support your business. So Instagram, Facebook, all of those social media posts, you podcast editing, getting podcasts organized, YouTube, putting videos onto YouTube, your typical personal assistant, executive assistant things. So we're not traveling at the moment, obviously, but booking travel was one of those things, and hotels, managing events, supporting a sales team with CRM data entry, those sorts of things. Data entry is a really good skill. Customer service is becoming really huge as well as we deal with more businesses going online. So if you've got an e-commerce site, for example, you need somebody to help you manage the fulfillment of any orders that are coming through. Yes, you'll have a warehousing, but you might have a customer service portal where customers are asking you questions. Having a VA to actually manage that for you is a really great use of their skills. Graphic design, web development, managing and maintaining your website, managing and maintaining updates to brochures, to all of your marketing materials, those sorts of things like Canva and all these free tools that we use now have really helped us be able to do a lot of this ourselves, which of course traps us into thinking we need to do it ourselves, which isn't the case. We can actually offload a lot of those tasks.
It is a wonderful look, one of the simplest but to me, life-changing tasks that one of my VA, Shari, does for me is she just manages my inbox.
Yeah.
So the email comes in and she sorts it in different places, and the things that I need to action, she puts into a task list. And so I can log on to my email and go, oh, look, it's all gone. All of that stuff that kind of contributes to that mental load. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to trawl through this, pick out find the things I've got to, the bills I've got to pay, the things that are important. And it's all just sorted for me magically, sometimes overnight while I'm sleeping. And I get up in the morning and I have this task list and everything's all organized. So, I absolutely, can sing the praises of having a virtual team to assist with those sorts of things. And it's interesting that you say that, Kristy, about this mentality, this idea that we have, because I think a lot of us, and I was trapped in it for a long time, when we start, say, a business or a side business, whatever it might be, that we need to keep doing it all ourselves because we're the only ones who know how to do it. What do you say to people when they're sort of in of that? Because this applies to lots of things in life, not just how we manage a work task, this idea that I'm the only one who really knows how to do it, therefore there's no point in trying to delegate it to somebody else.
Yeah, and it is that, and that's where mindset comes in, right? That's where mindset is so important, and it's such a challenge. I struggle with it every day now. Even there's certain things that I don't want to let go of because I don't think anybody else can do it. But the reality is that someone can do most things. Yes, there are absolutely some things that people can't do that is your area of expertise or your zone of genius, we call it. So, absolutely things that I wouldn't let anybody else do because that's my gig. That's my thing. However, you've got to make sure that it's the best use of your time. So if you can without a doubt say that the thing that you're holding on to, it's actually worthy of your hourly rate. So whatever you charge out, if it's worthy of that and it's bringing in that money, then it's absolutely fine. If you're sitting wondering about whether you should change your website to blue or green and how you're sitting fussing over it, yes, you can do it, but should you be doing it? No, you shouldn't, because that's the job of someone that you can pay $20 an hour to. Okay. So I think the key thing is to look at it from the point of view is it my zone of genius? Is it the one thing that I've been put on this earth to do? Or could I actually hand that down to somebody who's going to do it 10 times faster? And it's a bit letting go of that perfectionism, right? And that sense of needing to have control. Once you start to do it and you see that someone else can do it for you, then more often than not, you're going to let go of it a lot easier. But it's that getting over that barrier of letting somebody else do it and letting go. And I find the best way to do that is by recording a video of yourself doing it, that particular task, and then handing it over. Because if you can record a video of yourself doing it, someone else can do it. If you can't record a video, and if it's something that you can't actually produce a process out of, then it's probably something that you can't let go of, or you need to let go of to somebody who's specialized in that area, not a VA.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I found really interesting, just from my own experience, but also something that I've now tried to use in my work developing others, is this idea that sometimes when we have the courage to let somebody else do something and we step away from it a bit, we discover that they maybe actually do it better than the way that we did it. It won't be the same. I think that's part of that mental shift. Somebody else doing something, they won't do it the same way that you do it. But if you trust in the process of experimentation, the process of trying, the process of learning, and just say, right, this isn't the way I would do it, but let's just put it out there in the world and see what happens. And time again, I've been surprised by how well things have been received, or the kind of feedback we got, or where something led to that I would not have thought of myself. And so I think this idea that we're the only ones who know how to do something and do it well is well, I've certainly discovered that it's very unhelpful as a mindset. That when we
completely
do,
unhelpful.
Try something that somebody else has suggested, and it does take a little bit of courage, because, we make ourselves vulnerable. If it's our baby, putting something out there and going, oh, I don't know how this is going to go, and it's not the way I would have done it, but let's just see what happens. It does. It frees you up, but also you discover all sorts of new things that you might not have discovered.
And I think also, and I agree. And I think you can, look at this in the case of having someone come and clean your house, for example. I'm terrible with someone cleaning my house, because I kind of look and I go, oh, they didn't do that this week, or they didn't do this week, or whatever. But then I have to take a step back every time I do that and say, well, hang on a minute. They were here for 4 hours. Would I spend 4 hours cleaning the house to the level that they've been able to do it? Why am I complaining about this when the house is actually really beautifully clean and lovely? Am I prepared to get on my hands and knees and scrub that, mold patch on? No, I'm not. So step back, have a look at what's actually being done. And, a lot of the time it's because you haven't told them that area is important, or you haven't given them a proper brief to say, this is what I expect. You're just letting it go, and then you don't tell them that, or give them feedback that that's something that you didn't appreciate, not being done. So that works in the same way as working with a virtual assistant, for example, because if they don't know by you not giving them feedback, then how are they ever going to improve?
Absolutely. So it's the key really to delegation in any kind of, whether it's outsourcing, delegating within a
Mm.
workplace, just maintaining that communication, ensuring that you're giving feedback, allowing, I think the issue we often have with feedback, and this has been an issue I've been talking about a lot in workplaces lately, is that we kind of perceive it to be this kind of negative feedback, criticism type idea. But if we reframe feedback as opportunities for improvement, for continuous
Mm.
improvement, that there should always be this feedback loop of, what did we try, what worked, what didn't work, let's do more of what works, less of what didn't work, and see that as a continuous positive spiral of
Mm.
opportunity and improvement. We start to see feedback differently, and we're more likely to A, provide it, and B, be more receptive to it when it
Yeah,
is provided. Yeah.
definitely.
So, Kristy, let's go back to the beginning of this business. So this was what year? So 10, 12 years ago.
2009.
2009. Okay. So
Mm.
2009 was a long time prior to a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And you were discovering already in those early days the opportunities that are involved in remote working, both for you personally, so being able to do a bit more of that flexible work-life thing with small children, but then
Mm.
you expanded globally. How did that come about? Why the Philippines, and what's it been like to grow a team in an entirely different country?
Yeah, it's funny because I think I think it was just that um I had a very curious mind at that point, and I couldn't see. And I was very lucky as well, because when I was working in the hospital, my CEO, when I had both of my kids, allowed me to run projects from home. So he'd already given me that sense of, you know what, I trust the way you work. I trust that you're going to engage in, the work that I've given you, and I trust that you're really committed working at home in the hours that you've been given. So he'd already shown me that it was definitely possible. And so then I guess I realized at that point that if my business was going to grow and it was going to be scalable, I needed to employ outside of Australia. And look, from the very beginning, I had 5 employees that were in Australia, because some of the clients that we had didn't want to go offshore. It was still an unknown. There was a lot of fear around security of information, IP, all of that sort of stuff back then, and probably warranted, because there weren't a lot of measures in place, or a lot of history to go by with Australians working with offshore resources. And so at that point, I didn't have clients that had the same, I guess, curiosity as me, or the same trust in what I was doing. So once I'd had the first employee in the Philippines, I just had this girl who was, not that much younger than me. She had an entrepreneurial mind. She was very, very focused on something bigger than just working for me. So I was really lucky in that sense, that I had that partner, and our ideas matched, our values matched. And so we're like, right, where can we take this? What can we do with it? And a lot of the models back then were very much business processing offices. So the model was the same. It was bringing very, very low paid workers into an office environment in the center of, town. But we found faults in that by talking with local people in the Philippines that were local to the girl that I had hired, to Cherry. And Cherry, we'd talk to them and they'd say, they'd have to travel 2.5 to 3 hours every day, to and from work. And, they were getting paid, some of them were getting paid 50 cents an hour Australian, and they had kids, and so they had to hire a nanny to look after their kids. So in the end, they were getting home, and by the end of the week, they had no money in their pocket.
Mm.
And I was just thinking about that, going, why would you put yourself into that position? And then the reason is there just wasn't any other option, right? There wasn't anything else for them. So Cherry and I said, what if, and Cherry was working from home, what if we just grew the at-home model, because it was starting to have legs. So we did. So that's, and that was very important to me, because that was how I was working. And that was how a lot of the entrepreneurs that we were working with were also wanting to work. So we felt there was a really strong values match. And I think to answer your question about what's it like working with a team in the Philippines, very early on, we didn't see that there was a location. That there was a cultural difference in the way we were working. We were all focused on the same goal. Yes, we were locationally different, but we shared similar values. We were very focused on family, and we were very focused on our customer delivery. So, that didn't make a difference, because we could talk like this.
Absolutely. And that is, and look, those things that you've said about the challenges of travel, and certainly from working with my team, when I talk to them about whenever they have to go somewhere, and both are based in Manila, and it's really hard. Like, we complain about Sydney and Melbourne traffic, but
Oh, no.
yeah, it's a lot more complex there.
Yeah.
So to be able to provide people with home-based work, if there wasn't any other, is
It's one of the
why would
fastest
you not?
growing industries in the Philippines is the home-based worker industry. And, one of our VAs that we hired many, many years ago, she's been with us, I think, for 8 years now. She started a movement called the Virtual Home-Based Assistant. And she's got over, I think it's something like 70,000 people, that that she markets to. And these are all people wanting to work from home. The industry is growing, and it's really huge. And, I just feel very blessed that we tapped into that 10, 11 years ago, because we're so established now, and, people can see how beautiful our community of girls is. They all work from all over the Philippines, but every single day they have a little Skype group that they chat on that is only in their own dialect. We've got another one that's English only that I chat to them with, but they've got their own, and they chat all day, every day, and connect. And then we have a monthly catch up where we all get on Zoom and we all talk about certain things, and all the new VAs meet each other. So I actually think we're almost closer as a virtual community like that than we are as if they were working in an office and I was here.
And so, Kristy, because I think this might be a question in some of our audience's mind. Why the Philippines? Why not elsewhere in the world? What is the beauty of the Philippines for this type of work?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, because I didn't actually, I started out with Cherry in the Philippines, but for my creative services, because when we first started the business, the creative services were basically what lifted us straight away with graphic design and web development. We actually didn't go to the Philippines for that. We went to the Eastern Bloc countries, and those Eastern Bloc countries were unbelievably skilled, creatives, and Pakistan and India obviously are fantastic for web development as well. And so it was just through research, through hearing from listening to US-based and UK-based entrepreneurs as to where they were finding their resources and where, a lot of their team were, that I kind of started really honing in on those areas. And then once that was established, we listening again to what entrepreneurs were doing, and it was mainly the internet marketers out of the US that were using virtual assistants at this point. And so social media, that sort of stuff, I think it was the ethical nature of the Philippines, the work ethic, the family, the reason why they wanted to support businesses, and also talking to Cherry, and who she was then talking to. It was really around the Philippines being the best place because the Philippines love working with Australian clients. Big reason being that it's the Australian nature. You know, we have a very different work ethic ourselves, and we're a lot more relaxed as a business owner as well. We're a lot more relaxed in the way we engage, in the way we manage teams. In the US, it's a lot different, and a lot of our VAs didn't want to work graveyard shift. You know, the time zone difference is very close. We're only 2 or 3 hours difference at any one time to the Philippines. And everybody in the Philippines that we bring onto our team, every one of them have been to university. They've got university degrees of some sort. They learn English from a very, very young age. It's part of their curriculum that they learn English. So their English is usually very good when they're well educated. And they also start working with computers in primary school. So that in itself, all of those skills, all of those talents really lent itself to, you know, a great community of people to tap into.
Yeah, and just listening to you, I was sort of thinking about, you use the term zone of genius, which is one that I use as well when you talk about how we're all better off in all sorts of ways in terms of well-being and productivity and things that light us up when we get the opportunity to work in our zone of genius or play to our strengths. And it struck me as you were describing kind of those different cultures and different parts of the world. So perhaps that there's sort of cultural zones of genius, perhaps there,
Yeah.
that we do become known, and there is an element of, a good cultural match in terms of types of tasks, types of working, but also that interesting match between the types of people who like to work together. I can say that, yes, I am possibly a little too relaxed sometimes when it
Oh, me
comes
too.
to how I work with my team, and they're the
Yeah.
ones who have to keep me on the straight and narrow and
Yeah.
keep me organized. Not something I'd ever really considered before. So, and I love that. I love that you've used the term curious, that this has been driven to such a large extent from the sounds of things by this just curiosity about how things work and why things work, and then willingness to try, because I think that again just allows us to more readily identify and uncover our zone of genius and perhaps the zone of genius for others from the sounds of things.
Yeah, curiosity and connection for me. So connection is probably, it's a huge value for me. And when I realized that I connected on quite a deep level with the stories of the VAs that we were bringing in, I wanted to know about them. Very early in the piece, for the first 5 to 6 years of running the business, I was the one interviewing all of the VAs as they came in through the business. And I wanted to know about them. I could see on their CV that they had skills, but I wanted to know what was driving them to be working from home, because those stories and their reasons for wanting to be at home were what connected me more with my business and the purpose of what I was doing than just running a global business that supported clients. I mean, 5 years ago, I probably could have been, setting up a company over in the Philippines and having an office and going hell for leather and doing all of that. But I really pulled back from that. And, a lot of people would say, well, you put a ceiling, on the ability of what you could have. But it was never about that. It was never about actually driving volume rather than quality. It was always about, I'm bringing in a client that actually really shares the values. It's going to really take care of our team, work with them beautifully and understand the value and the benefit of having that resource available to them, rather than just someone who just wanted a quick, fix, get someone on and not work with us long term. So that's always been very important to me. Yeah.
So those values, that piece around purpose as driving motivational forces, which, I could bang on about from a psychological point of view, but just so lovely to see that come to life. And I mean, I know from my own experience, and also Jay, who's been working with me for quite some time, works with another client in Sydney, where you are.
Yeah.
And, I can see that has been just a long and fruitful and, wonderful
Yeah.
relationship there, that kind of connection, the loyalty that comes with that, and the mutual
Yeah.
support and mutual respect and mutual admiration, I think probably
Yeah.
it all comes into play as
It
well.
does, and look, many times, and we've all been through the stages where we've had a real dip in our motivation or a real dip in the inspiration for running our business, and that was me probably 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, where I just kind of just fell off the face of the planet, didn't want to be involved, just for whatever reasons, menopause, kids going through challenges, all of those sorts of things, and
Life just got hard.
life got hard, and I really questioned what I was actually doing, and whether or not it was still serving me the way that I was hoping it always would. And funnily enough, it always came back to, if I was ever thinking about selling the business or doing, stepping out of it, it always came back to, no, I can't do that because I'm way too connected to the people. And the people are why I do this. And would I ever trust anybody else with what I've built with the people? And I don't know that I could. I think I'd have a big hole in my heart not having this, and not knowing that I'm actually supporting so many beautiful people, both clients and VAs. So yeah, it comes back to the heart again.
And it's so lovely, isn't it, to be able to talk about work and about business in terms like values and heart and
Yeah.
connection and people, because they are the human elements that contribute to our success. And like you say, the motivation, the resilience
Yeah.
that we need sometimes to persevere. Money, turnover, revenue, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And obviously for some people that is a real driver, it is a real motivator.
Yeah.
But I think probably for many of us, there's so many other aspects to it that really
Yeah.
make a difference.
And I think when you
Kristy,
get all of that, money comes, right?
yes. Well,
Mm.
that's certainly what we're starting to understand from a scientific point of view, that yes, when we're happy, when we're content, when we're serving our purpose, when we're operating in our zone of genius, no matter how hard any of that, and it's not to say any of that's necessarily easy, and I'm sure you would be able to, testify to the fact that this stuff does not mean that it comes easily,
No.
or that there isn't a huge amount of hard work and sometimes heartache involved in that as
Mm.
well. But when we get to
Mm.
operate from that place, yeah, the other stuff does come. The money
Mm.
comes, the productivity comes,
Yeah.
the success in those kind of traditional metrics come.
Yeah. Definitely.
So, Kristy, what has it been like for you as somebody who's been involved? It was interesting that you said that when you first started out with this idea, it had come in part because a manager had trusted you to work from home, to work remotely. And for those of us who have worked from home and worked remotely for many years, I know for me, 2020 and the realization that for a lot of people, this idea, online video calls, remote teams, was very new and maybe somewhat confronting. What was it like for you watching that, having had this long background in working this way already?
Yeah. I felt I felt really, really bad, in myself for not experiencing such a huge change to the way I was operating.
Like a
You
bit of
know,
survivor guilt or
there,
something.
yeah, completely, completely. Where, I've got a lot of friends in Melbourne, business friends who some were in the travel industry, and what it totally decimated, right? Totally, totally decimated, and angry, and having to conform to something that was totally new outside of, and here I am going about my merry little way with not a change in the world. So yeah, I did feel. I, I, I felt grateful to start with, because that this whole pandemic has allowed me to thrive,
Mm.
so I'm very, very grateful for that. My business is thriving because of the fact that people are coming to this realization that they can actually get support virtually, they can work from home, they can change the way that they do things. but yeah, it was definitely that survivor guilt of just feeling like I had it all together and really nothing in my world changed.
And did it surprise you that so few people perhaps had considered remote work or online work or any of those sorts of elements, the things that people I now see lots of workplaces sort of going, how do we do this? Even a year in, they're
Mm.
still grappling a little bit with that. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, I think it did, but I think only because, I've been doing this for 11, 12 years, and I think because I see it around the world. Australia's been a very late adopter to this working from home. I mean, at the same time, my husband, his company is a huge multinational company, and they had done this years ago by
Mm,
hot desking and making sure that everyone works from home. And so I think some at some level, it's happening, but at the smaller level, entrepreneurs and small business owners, I think, a lot of us had already been working from home. A lot
mm,
of us really understood that. It's probably the mid-tier businesses that, have been hit the hardest. And it's interesting because probably the last month or so, I've started having these, not the small businesses anymore, it's the medium to large businesses coming to me asking about this, and actually saying they really love the model that we have of the home-based model. It's
mm,
amazing that they're now considering that this could actually be something for them. But
mm.
yeah, it's strange that, but again, it takes something so significant sometimes for people to reimagine the way they do things, and I think that's definitely what COVID has provided us. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, disruption. That we
Yeah.
again, the online entrepreneurial world, perhaps more so than anyone else, but other industries too. Starting to use the term disruption as
Mm.
a mechanism for thinking about how we do things differently. And this has
Mm.
been disruption on a grand scale.
Yes. Well, I had a phone call on Friday from a logistics company. So this is where we're heading now. So
Mm,
a major Australian-based logistics company that essentially are now having a look at ways that they can actually change how they operate. So
mm,
using virtual assistants for the majority of their purchase order data entry now, rather than having somebody in the office sitting there, because right now they can't, right?
mm,
So we
interesting.
literally started somebody today working for them doing data
Wow,
entry. Yeah, I know,
that's
that's
fast.
how quickly it happens, right? But they needed a quick
Friday to Monday.
solution. Yeah, Friday
Yeah,
to Monday, needed a fast
yeah.
solution. And so they're able to pivot really, really quickly, which is great,
Mm,
once they
mm.
see the benefit of the solution that virtual workers can provide. Mm,
Mm. And so what do you say to people who, because there will be some people listening going, "Oh, we're replacing Australian jobs with,
mm.
offshore." What is your response to that?
I've been dealing with this for 12 years.
I can imagine.
And I have. And look, I'm not really outspoken about this. I just sit back and I do what I do. And my point is this: a lot of Australian small businesses would be obsolete and shut down if we didn't have the availability of offshore resources for them. There
Mm,
is a time and a place for Australian resources. And, I did an activity 8 years ago with a certain association. And one of my clients attended their conference and stood up when that point was made and
mm,
said, it's an outrage. We shouldn't be sending work offshore. And she said, I'd like to have a, show of hands as to how many of you know how to do this task. Who knows how to, upload a YouTube video to such and such? Oh, and who knows how to do this? And, by the time she got through 5 things, one person was standing in a room of
mm,
60. And she
mm,
said, that's why we go offshore. We go offshore because a lot of those digital online skills are not had here. There's not enough people with those skills, whereas the Philippines, for example, have been doing this for many, many years because there's been a desire from the US to have those skills. So I think the answer is this, that those people that are saying, why are we sending the work offshore? It's actually stimulating our economy by sending it offshore, because the businesses that are allowed to continue operating are supporting our economy.
Absolutely. And it's, well, there's an element of that specialization piece in there as well. And I think too, again, as you were talking about that, I thought really, borders have come back into the picture a little bit now with border closures, both locally and internationally. But if we're talking about a global economy, a global world, this, and I learn and gain so much from my offshore team in terms of my understanding of what it is, the stories. We've had long conversations about how different countries are handling COVID and what it's like for you, and how does this work there. And so, the opportunity to learn from different cultures, to learn from different experiences across the world. It's sort of, does it really matter if you're on the end of a bit of technology, whether I'm talking to someone in Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland, or the Philippines? It kind of doesn't. We're all people. And at the moment, we're all glued together by this experience of a pandemic.
We are. And I think as well, there are certain opportunities for virtual assistants, for example, in Australia. There are definitely opportunities. And if you're a business that doesn't want to send your business offshore, then that's absolutely fine. Those resources are there available to you if you can afford, to pay for them. And I'm not degrading, or saying that, virtual assistants in Australia, for example, are any less than virtual assistants or any better than virtual assistants. There is, and because they charge more doesn't mean that they're better, or doesn't mean it's just the economy that we live in Australia, that's what we need to charge. And so for me as an agency, to provide local virtual assistants, I'd have to be charging so that I make money out of it. I'd then have to be charging so much more, which I just didn't, didn't suit us. Our clients couldn't afford it. So,
Yeah. So, I mean, I had to ask that question because I just thought, there will be people who are wondering that. And to be honest, for me too, when I first heard about virtual assistants, and maybe it's 5 years ago now, I don't know. I've like most people, I've lost track of time now. I did have somebody in the supermarket this morning ask me what day it was. So it's the common problem. But for me, and I do remember that one of the, probably the first conversation that you and I had was, I needed to know that the reason that these were offshore resources were for all the right reasons and not just because it was cheaper. I came to quickly realize that there's a lot of complexities with dealing with employment in other nations, because every, employment law, for example, is different. There are different cultural practices. There's a whole lot of other elements. And so for me, it was knowing that you had all of that well in hand, and that, for all the reasons that you've mentioned already today, that, this was happening for the right reasons, and that I could feel comfortable in that. And as I said, it's been a joy and a blessing in so many ways for me.
But I think, when I'm interviewing clients, if a client is asking me those things, I instantly know they're a values match, because, if you didn't have an interest in making sure that we were paying them enough, that we were doing all the right things, then I'd be quite concerned that you're not actually that interested in their well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. And I'm wondering too whether, because you did say that the business is thriving, and obviously there are organisations, there are people who are looking at doing things differently. Do you have stories of people who have perhaps sought out the help of a virtual assistant because COVID has given them what I call a moment of COVID reflection? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? How am I doing it? Is this the best way?
Yeah, look, I mean, I have probably 10 phone calls a week from people just querying whether or not it's the right choice for them and how they would go about it. And I think one of the I had a photographer actually, which, she's incredible. And, the difficulty for her, actually, I won't talk about the photographer, I'll talk about the flute specialist. So she's,
Yes,
yeah,
do.
she teaches flute, right? And normally she'd have people coming in and teaching flute. So she's pretty much sat down and worked out how she can take her business online completely, do her flute lessons online, and she's building a little program around that as well. And so now she's got a thriving business that has totally changed, because she wouldn't have been able to actually teach flute during this lockdown period. And she's brought on a virtual assistant. She just wasn't too sure, but she's brought on a virtual assistant to help her basically market this new business
Mm,
model,
mm,
which has been incredible. And she's very unsure about how she wanted to go about it. But, that's an example of someone who's kind of just questioned and not sat in despair, not sat in the despair of losing students, but said, how can I use this to my advantage? What's the opportunity in this disaster? What is the opportunity? And off she's gone and had a great chat with me, and we've worked out that we absolutely can do it. Mm.
mm, mm. And are you finding that I mean, I know I was one of those people. I took on my second VA last year because of a need for all sorts of complicated reasons, like taking on some extra work in a different field and therefore needing more support to do the things that I wanted to keep doing, that I
Mm.
had started, that I just literally didn't have the time to do anymore. And like I said, it's been a blessing in so many ways, because I've discovered all of these things that I was still doing, like sorting through my own inbox, that I
Yeah.
discovered it was far more satisfying to have somebody else do that. Are
Mm.
there other people like that for whom,
Yeah.
COVID's just gone, there must be a better way?
Yeah, look, seriously, probably the majority of calls that are coming through at the moment are small businesses that have just started. So there might be business coaches, or in those sorts of areas where they've decided that they're not established enough to have enough clients online to support them. So what they've done is they've gone back to a full-time project role. So it might be that they've gone back and worked in a large corporate full time, but they don't want to lose the traction that they've got on their small business. So they've hired a virtual assistant to actually maintain their social media, they're managing their emails, and just basically slowly start to keep that going, so that they've
Mm,
still, they're not losing time on that they're keeping going. So there's probably 3 or 4 businesses in the last month that are doing that, which it is a trend, definitely, that I'm seeing, that people are realizing that they can't sustain. Or photographer business, like I said, she came to me and literally her whole business was weddings, and obviously that's not happening at the moment. And so she's just basically taken a step back and gone to work in an office role for whatever. And she's got a VA just managing her online store and, making sure that things are ticking over. So, yeah, look, definitely a
mm,
trend.
mm. Yeah, and look, I love the creativity behind all of this. I love that,
Mm.
like you said before, that we could sit back and despair. And of course, we're all allowed our moments of despair
Yeah.
as well, because, this has been tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I say it has been, still
It
is,
is.
as we both, converse from lockdown.
Yeah.
But it's about that, yeah, I think you said it right at the beginning. Instead of what can't I control, what can I control, actually focusing in on the things that I can do. So even if
Mm.
that has meant for some people, perhaps to some extent, parking what they were working on,
Yeah.
because aside from anything else, it's being in lockdown, being in the middle of a global pandemic, it takes up a lot of brain space just
Yeah.
existing, you know?
Yeah, it's
Just
tiring. It's so
existing is
tiring.
tiring. And I know, for me last year in particular, it was just like, because the marketing element of running a business is such a big component, and I knew that I just didn't have I just couldn't, literally, with children at home, homeschooling, everything else that was going on. That was the piece that took the most from me physically, psychologically. And I didn't have the capacity to keep doing that. So it was, let's look at the other options. And for me, and from the sounds of things, for like lots of people, the addition of a VA to the team and the support for me from an existing VA, has just made a world of difference, because you don't want to let go of everything you've built
No.
up while you have to have this kind of momentary or perhaps longer term slight pivot, slight change in
Yeah.
strategy.
And I think that's, it's that pride as well. It's that not wanting, a lot of people think that they have to admit a defeat in, just parking that, but it's not. It's, we've got to live. We have to be able to afford to live. And if your dream and your passion project of setting up and going off on your own business isn't able to, provide that for you, and you've got to take a step back into, what does provide, then go and do that. But don't feel like it's a defeat. It's a momentary lapse in, building that project, and it can still stay there. It can still slowly tick along with the help of a virtual assistant until you're ready to come back into it.
Absolutely. It's adaptability, which is what we're all doing right
Yeah,
now, isn't it? It's
it
adapting to
is.
change, which is not right, wrong,
Accepting,
or
and it's
otherwise. It's,
accepting.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, Kristy, what has it been like for you in all of this? I mean, the business does sound like it's thriving, which is
Yeah.
wonderful, but I'm guessing that it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Have there been difficult or
No.
challenging times, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's been challenging and difficult times. Before COVID really hit. So 2019, obviously going through some challenges. I've, got two teenage children, one with fairly serious mental health concerns that we've been dealing with. So that's in itself has been taking a lot of my time, learning about emotional coaching and all of those sorts of things. So that's kind of almost been full time. The business actually took a step back before COVID anyway. And when COVID hit, again, a step back. I also run a junior AFL club here in Sydney,
Busy
in
lady.
my spare time. Yeah. Which again, that for 6 years, that's kind of been my full-time role rather than my own business, because my own business is systemized enough that it can pretty much operate on me doing 20% of the work and my team doing 80%. So, I had 80% of my time sitting there, so I needed to fill it with something. So there we go. So with lockdown, it's been hard because the AFL isn't happening. It's not operating, and I've got two teenage kids that need their sport for their mental health. So that in itself has been a challenge to get them out of their rooms and active and, doing something. The AFL provided that structure. It provided me with a community to actually be a part of every weekend. So without that, big challenge. But what it has allowed me to do is take a step back into my business. The business was second fiddle to all of these other things for the last 3 years. And now I'm just seeing the benefit of not having all of the other busyness and being able to step back into it and really evaluate why I'm there and what I'm doing. And that's actually been a blessing. So, whilst there's hassles around, sitting here in the corner of my bedroom, having to do Zoom calls, you in your kitchen having to do yours with kids in the background and dogs barking. And, they're the, things that everybody is going through at the moment through COVID, having to be homebound. And not having that, we were talking about this earlier, not having a place that you can actually, a space that you can call your own, where you feel like you can be creative and you can actually really blossom. I just am moved around from post to pillar and not really having that space. I'm craving that space.
Yes, I think one of the interesting things about people, those of us who have worked from home for a long time, is that it's all very well to say, oh, you're still just working from home, but you're not usually working from home with the
With
whole
everybody
family
else.
around you.
I
And
know.
that's quite different. It's almost like
Very.
everybody's moved into my office.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because, from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was our space, and we could actually do what we want. I mean, I remember, my husband works from home as well, so he's always in my space too. But when he has to go and see someone, a client meeting, I'd be having my music on, and I'd have my candle burning, and I'd have, and life was great, and I was in my zone and working. But the minute someone else comes back into that, it changes the energy.
And that is a whole other conversation that we could have, Kristy, about how to
The
set up home
energy.
offices. I know we're working on a house build at the moment, and I am designing my dream home office.
Oh,
And that will be complete with everything I need for podcasting and video, but also just my space. Um,
amazing.
yeah, which I think is something that we will all be thinking about into the future regarding
Yeah.
home office. It's not just about having the desk and the monitors and those sorts of things, but there is probably I know there's a whole other
There's a mental
conversation there
aspect.
about.
Yeah.
There is. So, but we're going to
Mm.
have to hold on to that one for another day. Look, this has been a glorious conversation about, I think if there was a theme to it, is probably about adaptability. It
Yeah.
is about adapting to change as a business, as a human, the possibilities that thinking differently about how we work, with whom we work, and all of that lovely stuff about the values connection and that being a
Mm.
driving force.
And
Is
curiosity. Stay
and
curious about how
curiosity,
you could do
absolutely.
things different.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm
Mm.
hoping, I'm quite sure that our audience will be inspired by everything that you've said. Whatever, wherever, this is all applicable to so many different elements of life, whether or not you run your own business and are looking for support or not. I think the notions of,
Yeah.
of adaptability, of values-based work, of connection, of curiosity just underpin so many things that we do in our lives, and that all support our well-being. So thank you very much,
Thanks,
Kristy, for
Ellen. Thank
everything that you've
you.
shared. We will pop all of your details and the details of Virtual Elves in the show notes for today's episode, so that you can find out more. And of course, I'm quite sure that Kristy would love to hear from you if you have any questions, particularly about not just the services she provides, but maybe even a little bit about how you build up a business and survive through difficult times. Kristy, thanks
Definitely.
again for being here.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you to everyone watching.